Hello everyone, if you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
One suitcase, one dream, the day everything changed. Imagine stepping off a plane into a world where everything is unfamiliar. The language, the smells, even the way the light hits the buildings. That was me, standing in Los Angeles International Airport with nothing but a single suitcase that barely held my entire life. My hands were sweaty, my heart was pounding, and my English vocabulary was so limited that I could barely ask for directions to the restroom. I had left my home country with nothing but hope and a dream that America would somehow fix everything that was broken. But standing there, surrounded by the chaos of travelers rushing past me like I was invisible, I realized something terrifying. I had no idea what I was doing. My sister had promised to pick me up, but I couldn't find her. My phone didn't work. The airport announcements boomed in English so fast I couldn't catch a single word. I felt the panic rising in my chest. What if nobody came? What if I was stranded in this massive, overwhelming country with nothing but a suitcase full of clothes and a heart full of fear? I found a bench near baggage claim and sat down, clutching my suitcase like it was the only thing keeping me from floating away. I watched families reunite, couples kiss, and friends embrace. I watched everyone accept me. I was the outsider, the one who didn't belong. And then, just when I was about to break down, I heard a voice, a kind voice, speaking English slowly. As if they knew I wouldn't understand fast English. Are you okay? Can I help you? I looked up and saw a woman, maybe in her 50s, with the kindest eyes I had ever seen. In my broken, awkward English, I managed to say, "I. Looking for sister. She not here." That woman didn't laugh at my English. She didn't correct me. She just sat down next to me and said, "Let's find your sister together." That was my first lesson in America, that kindness doesn't need perfect English. That connection doesn't require flawless pronunciation. That sometimes, the most beautiful words are the ones spoken from the heart, even if they're broken. We found my sister 45 minutes later. She had been stuck in traffic. But in those 45 minutes, that stranger taught me more about America than any textbook ever could. She taught me that people here actually care. She taught me that my broken English wasn't a barrier, it was a bridge. And she told me something I'll never forget. You came here with one suitcase, but you'll leave with a whole new life. I didn't believe her then. But I was about to find out just how right she was. The first night in America, when hope felt like a mistake. Your first night in America isn't like the movies. In the movies, there's dramatic music, a beautiful sunset, and someone waiting for you with open arms. In my reality, there was a tiny apartment in a neighborhood I didn't know, a mattress on the floor that my sister had borrowed from a friend, and the sound of sirens outside my window that made me jump every 5 minutes. My sister had done her best. She had a small studio apartment in a part of Los Angeles that wasn't glamorous, but it was shelter. That first night, I lay on that mattress, staring at the ceiling, and asked myself the same question over and over again, what have I done? I had left everything behind, my family, my friends, my language, my entire identity, for a country where I couldn't even order a cup of coffee without feeling like a burden. The next morning, my sister handed me a bus map and a list of simple English phrases she had written on a piece of paper. "You need to learn how to survive here," she said. "Start with these." I looked at the paper. "Hello." "Thank you." "How much?" "Where is the bathroom?" I had studied English back home, but studying and speaking are completely different things. In class, I could recite vocabulary. But in real life, my brain would freeze, my tongue would tie itself in knots, and I would forget everything I had ever learned. I spent my first week terrified to leave the apartment. I would wait until my sister came home, and then we would go to the supermarket together. I would watch her interact with the cashier, and I would try to memorize the words. "Hi, how are you?" the cashier would say. "Good, thank you," my sister would reply. It seemed so simple, so natural. But when I tried it myself, my voice would come out as a whisper, my accent so thick I could barely recognize myself. One afternoon, my sister had to work late. I was hungry. I had no choice but to face the supermarket alone. I walked to the store with my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed a few items and stood in line, rehearsing my lines in my head. "Hi, how are you?" "Good, thank you." When it was my turn, the cashier smiled and said, "Hey, how's it going?" My mind went blank. That wasn't the phrase I had prepared. How's it going? What did that mean? Was it the same as how are you? I froze. I stood there, holding my groceries, my face turning red, unable to say a single word. The cashier waited patiently. A line formed behind me. I wanted to disappear. And then, a voice from behind me said, "She's still learning English. Just give her a moment." The cashier nodded and smiled warmly. "Take your time, sweetie. No rush." That voice belonged to a stranger. A man who didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, but saw my struggle and offered kindness instead of frustration. That was my first lesson in American kindness. It wouldn't be my last. Finding work, finding courage, the interview that changed everything. What if I told you that the most terrifying moment of my life wasn't arriving in America with one suitcase, but walking into a job interview with English so broken I could barely introduce myself? That's exactly where I found myself 3 weeks after my disastrous supermarket trip. My sister had been supporting me, but she couldn't do it forever. I needed a job. I needed money. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't a complete failure. I had applied to a small Vietnamese restaurant in the neighborhood, thinking that at least the owners would understand my language. But when I walked in for the interview, I was greeted by an American manager, a tall, friendly woman named Karen who had absolutely no idea how terrified I was. She smiled and asked, "So, tell me about yourself." My mind went completely blank. Tell her about myself? In English? I had rehearsed answers in my head for days. My name is. I'm from Vietnam. I work hard. I need job. But standing there, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts, those words wouldn't come. I opened my mouth, and what came out was this: I I good worker. I work very hard. I clean, cook, help. You no regret. I wanted to die. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. Karen didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. She just looked at me with a soft smile and said, "That's the most honest interview answer I've ever heard. You're hired. Start tomorrow." I couldn't believe it. I thought I had failed. I thought my English was so bad that no one would ever give me a chance. But Karen saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. She saw determination, honesty, and a willingness to try. That was my first job in America. It wasn't glamorous. I washed dishes, cleaned tables, and sometimes helped in the kitchen. But I learned something valuable during those shifts. I learned that you don't need perfect English to be a good worker. You just need to show up, work hard, and treat people with respect. I also started listening. I listened to customers speaking English and tried to pick up new words. "Would you like a refill? Can I get the check, please? Have a great day." I would repeat these phrases to myself at night, practicing in front of the mirror until they felt natural. And when I finally used them correctly with a customer, I felt like I had won a gold medal. At the end of my first month, Karen called me into her office. I was terrified, convinced she was going to fire me. Instead, she said, "You know, you're one of the hardest workers I've ever had. And your English is getting better every day. Keep going. You're going to do great things." Those words meant more to me than any paycheck. Someone believed in me. And for the first time since I arrived, I started believing in myself too. But the real test was yet to come, because that job would lead me to something I never expected. Something that would change my life in ways I couldn't even imagine. The kindness of strangers, when the world showed me its heart. Have you ever been saved by someone you'll never see again? Someone who appeared out of nowhere, offered you exactly what you needed, and then disappeared like a guardian angel who had other people to save? That happened to me more times than I can count during my first year in America. The kindness of strangers became my lifeline, my teacher, and eventually, my reason to believe that this country could become my home. There was the elderly woman at the bus stop who saw me staring at the schedule with confusion and said, "You're going to the market, honey? This bus will take you there. I'll tell you when to get off." She sat with me for 20 minutes, chatting about her grandchildren, not caring that my English was slow and full of mistakes. When we arrived, she smiled and said, "Welcome to America, sweetheart. We're lucky to have you." I almost cried. There was the librarian who noticed me struggling with a form I couldn't understand. She sat with me for an hour, explaining every word, writing down definitions on a piece of paper. She never once looked annoyed or impatient. She just kept saying, "You're doing great. This is hard stuff. Take your time." There was the mailman who would wave and say hello every day, even when I could barely respond. He would slow down his speech, point at things, and teach me new words without even being asked. "Mailbox," he would say, pointing. "Letter. Package." He turned my daily walk to the mailbox into a free English lesson. I started to notice something important. Every act of kindness wasn't just about helping me. It was teaching me how to be a better person. It was showing me that the world is full of people who want to connect, who want to help, who want to make a difference. I started paying it forward. At the restaurant, I would help new immigrants who came in looking just as lost as I had been. I would slow down my speech, smile, and say, "Take your time. I'm learning too." And I would watch their faces relax as they realized they were safe. That was the lesson, that kindness doesn't require perfect grammar. It doesn't require a certain accent. It just requires showing up and seeing someone who needs to be seen. But the kindness of strangers would soon lead me to something even more unexpected. Someone who would change my life forever. Someone who started with a simple, broken English sentence from me and turned it into a love story I never saw coming. Love in a new language, when my broken English won his heart. What if I told you that the worst mistake I ever made in English turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me? It was a Tuesday evening at the restaurant, a slow night with only a few tables occupied. I was wiping down the counter when a man walked in, tall, with messy brown hair and the kind of smile that made you want to smile back without knowing why. He sat at the counter, ordered a bowl of pho, and started chatting with Karen. I was trying not to listen, but his voice was warm and easy, the kind of American English that felt like music even when I couldn't catch every word. Then Karen called me over. "This is Mark," she said. "He's a regular here. He's been coming for years." Mark smiled at me and said, "Hi. I've seen you here. You're new, right?" My heart started racing. I wanted to say something cool and confident. Instead, what came out was, "Yes. New. I am here in new. You see me?" He didn't laugh. He didn't correct me. He just tilted his head and said, "Yeah, I see you. I was wondering what your name is." "My name is..." I paused, suddenly forgetting my own name. My name is Mai. "Nice to meet you, Mai. I'm Mark." He stuck out his hand for a handshake, and I just stood there staring at it like it was a foreign object. Karen whispered, "He wants to shake your hand." I panicked and did the most awkward thing possible. I grabbed his hand and shook it way too hard, like I was trying to pump water from a well. He laughed, not a mean laugh, but a genuine, warm laugh. "That's a great handshake," he said. "You're really strong." I wanted to disappear. But then he said, "You know, your English is really good for someone who's just learning. How long have you been here?" I felt my face turn red. My English was terrible, and we both knew it. But he wasn't making fun of me. He was just talking to me. Like I was a normal person. Like my broken English didn't matter. Over the next few weeks, Mark became a regular at the restaurant. He would come in, order his pho, and ask me questions. Simple questions. How was your day? What's your favorite food? Do you miss home? I would answer in my broken, stumbling English, and he would listen, really listen, not just wait for his turn to talk. One night, he asked me a question that terrified me. Would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Not here. Somewhere else. I froze. Dinner? With an American man? In English? It was the most terrifying invitation I had ever received. But something in his eyes made me say yes. And that yes changed absolutely everything about my life in America. Cultural differences we laughed at, the disaster that became our best memory. You know how in romantic movies, the first date is always perfect? The lighting is soft, the conversation flows effortlessly, and both people look like they stepped out of a magazine. My first date with Mark was the exact opposite of that. It was an absolute disaster, and somehow, that disaster became the most beautiful memory of my entire life. He had picked a small Italian restaurant in the city, the kind with candles on the tables and menus written in cursive that I couldn't read. I spent the first 10 minutes panicking, trying to find a word I could recognize. Mark noticed and said, "Want me to order for us?" "I know what's good here." I nodded, so relieved I could have kissed him right there. He ordered pasta and wine, and we started talking, or rather, he started talking. And I started nodding and smiling while my brain desperately tried to translate. But here's where it gets interesting. Mark told me a story about his day, a funny story about a dog at work, and I meant to say, "That sounds cute." But instead, I said, "That sounds like cat." He looked confused. "Cat? What cat?" I tried again. "No, not cat. Something, little and with hair. Furry," he offered. "Yes. Furry. That sounds furry." We both burst out laughing. He wasn't laughing at me, he was laughing with me, at the absurdity of the situation. "I think you meant cute," he said. "Yeah, cute. Cute dog." "I don't know," he said, smiling. "I think furry dog is actually more accurate. I'm going to start saying that." That was the moment I realized I was falling in love with this man. He didn't mock my mistakes. He celebrated them. He turned them into jokes we could both enjoy. He made me feel safe to be imperfect. Then came the most embarrassing moment of the night. I wanted to thank him for being so patient with my English, so I tried to say, "You make me feel comfortable." But instead, I said, "You make me feel comfortable, like a couch." His face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds, confusion, realization, and then utter delight. "A couch?" he repeated, trying not to laugh. "I make you feel like a couch?" "No. Not couch. Comfortable. Like you safe. Not couch." I was so embarrassed I wanted to hide under the table. But he just laughed and said, "You know what? I'm really flattered. I've never been compared to a couch before, but I think it's the best compliment I've ever gotten. Couches are comfortable, reliable, and people always want to sit on them." I buried my face in my hands. "I hate my English," I mumbled. He reached across the table, took my hands, and said something I'll never forget, "Don't hate your English. It's the most honest language I've ever heard. You say exactly what you mean, even if you say it wrong. That's beautiful." That night, I learned that love doesn't need perfect grammar. It just needs honesty, courage, and the willingness to laugh at yourself. By the end of dinner, I was laughing more than I had in months. And when Mark walked me to my bus stop, he said, "So, can I see you again?" My answer was the simplest English I had ever spoken: yes. Definitely yes. But that was just the beginning. The real adventure was about to start. And it would lead us to something I had never expected, a marriage that would test everything I thought I knew about love and language. Getting married, two worlds become one. What if I told you that the most beautiful wedding I've ever seen was the one where I couldn't understand half the vows? That was my wedding day, a perfect blend of chaos, love, and the kind of cultural confusion that makes life worth living. After months of dating, Mark had proposed. And by proposed, I mean he tried to propose in Vietnamese, completely butchering the words. And I had no idea what he was saying until he got down on one knee and I realized, oh, this is happening. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. The wedding planning was an adventure in itself. We wanted to combine our cultures, American traditions and Vietnamese traditions, and somehow make it all work. My mother sent me a list of Vietnamese wedding customs that was so long it could have been a novel. Mark's mother sent us a list of American wedding traditions that was equally overwhelming. We spent weeks going back and forth, trying to figure out how to honor both families without creating a logistical nightmare. The day of the wedding arrived, and it was everything I had ever dreamed of, and also nothing like I had imagined. I wore a traditional Vietnamese áo dai for the ceremony and an American white dress for the reception. Mark wore a tuxedo but also performed the Vietnamese tea ceremony with me, pouring tea for our parents and receiving their blessings. His parents had learned a few Vietnamese phrases to say during the ceremony, and my parents had practiced English phrases for their toasts. The whole thing was a beautiful mess of mispronunciations, laughter, and tears. During the reception, Mark's best man gave a speech that I couldn't understand at all. He talked too fast and used too many American idioms. I just smiled and nodded, hoping I wasn't agreeing to something embarrassing. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, looked at all the faces in the room, my family, his family, friends from both countries, and said something that came straight from my heart, in my imperfect English. I came to America with one suitcase. I had no friends, no family, no English. Today, I have all of those. Today, I marry my best friend. Today, I am home. The room went quiet. And then everyone cheered. Mark's mother came up to me afterward, tears in her eyes, and said, "I understood every word you said. Not because of your English, but because of your heart." That was the moment I truly understood, language is just the surface. What matters is the meaning beneath it. My broken English had brought me to this moment. My mistakes, my struggles, my determination, they had led me to the most wonderful man and the most beautiful day of my life. But the adventure was just beginning. Because marriage is not a destination, it's a journey. And our journey was about to take us somewhere I never expected. Becoming a mother in America, the day my world expanded. Picture this, you're lying in a hospital bed in a foreign country, holding a tiny human who is half you and half someone you love. And you realize that everything you thought you knew about language, about love, about belonging, it all just became infinitely more complicated. That was me, the day my daughter Sophia was born. She came into the world screaming, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake up the entire neighborhood. And as I held her, I felt this overwhelming wave of emotion, joy, terror, love, and a new kind of fear I had never experienced before. I was going to raise a child in America. A child who would speak English like a native. A child who would grow up in a culture that was still so foreign to me. What if I couldn't teach her about my homeland? What if she grew up ashamed of my accent? What if she didn't want to learn my language because her mother sounded so different from everyone else's mother? I started sobbing right there in the delivery room. Mark panicked. Are you in pain? Do you need a doctor? What's wrong? I couldn't even explain it in English. The words wouldn't come. So I just pointed at the baby and then at myself and then at him, and somehow, he understood. He leaned down and whispered, "You're going to be an amazing mother. Because you're going to give her 2 worlds. And that's the greatest gift you can ever give a child." I had never thought of it that way. To me, my 2 worlds had always felt like a burden, constantly translating, constantly switching, constantly feeling like I belonged to neither. But Mark saw it as a gift. He saw our daughter as the bridge between 2 cultures, 2 languages, 2 ways of loving. And he was right. The early years of motherhood were exhausting and beautiful and terrifying all at once. I would talk to Sophia in Vietnamese, and Mark would talk to her in English. She learned both languages without even trying. She just absorbed them like a sponge. And there were moments that absolutely melted my heart. When she was 2, she pointed at a bird and said, "Look, Mommy, a chim." Using the Vietnamese word for bird without even realizing she had switched languages. When she was 3, she told Mark, "Daddy, I love you like the moon loves the stars." In English. Her own words, her own beautiful combination of the languages she was learning. I started reading to her every night, children's books in English, but also Vietnamese stories that my mother had sent me from home. And as I read to her, I realized that I was healing something in myself too. I was reclaiming my language, my stories, my heritage. I was no longer ashamed of where I came from. I was proud to share it with my daughter. But motherhood also brought new challenges to my marriage. Because now there were 3 of us, and the cultural differences that had been cute during our dating years suddenly felt more complicated. And one night, something happened that made me question everything I had built in America. The struggles nobody told me about, when love wasn't enough. What if I told you that the hardest part of my American journey wasn't arriving with one suitcase, learning English, or even navigating a new culture? It was the moment I realized that love alone isn't always enough to hold a marriage together. That realization hit me like a thunderstorm on a clear day, completely unexpected and utterly devastating. It happened during a quiet evening at home. Sophia was 3 years old, running around the living room with her stuffed bunny. And Mark and I were having one of those conversations that started small and somehow exploded into something much bigger. The topic was discipline. How we wanted to raise our daughter. Mark, the American, believed in giving children space to make their own choices. Me, the Vietnamese mother, believed in structure, respect, and clear boundaries. "You're too strict," he said. "You're too relaxed," I replied. We went back and forth, our voices rising, our words becoming sharper. And then he said something that cut me deeper than any insult ever could. "Maybe you're just raising her the way you were raised. But this is America. Things are different here." I froze. Different here. Those two words hit me like a slap in the face. In that moment, I didn't hear what he was actually trying to say. I heard, "You're not American enough. Your way is wrong. You don't belong." The argument ended with me in tears and Mark sleeping on the couch. I spent the entire night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. Was I too strict? Was I too foreign? Was I failing as a mother and a wife because I couldn't let go of my culture? The next morning, I didn't speak to Mark. I went through the motions, made breakfast, got Sophia ready, went to work, but I felt hollow. I felt like I had failed at the one thing I wanted most, building a life that honored both my cultures. And then, something unexpected happened. Mark came home from work early. He sat me down at the kitchen table, took both my hands, and said something that made me cry all over again. "I was wrong," he said. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean that you're not American enough. I meant. I don't know what I meant. I was scared. I'm scared of messing up our daughter. But I know one thing for sure, you're not wrong. We're just different. And different is okay." In that moment, I realized something profound. Marriage isn't about erasing your differences. It's about learning to dance with them. It's about realizing that two people from two worlds can create something beautiful together, but only if they're willing to keep talking, keep listening, and keep forgiving. We decided to write down our parenting values, mine from Vietnam, his from America, and create something new together. A hybrid. A blend. A new way of raising our daughter that honored both of us. It wasn't easy. It still isn't. But that night, we committed to something that changed everything. We committed to never letting our differences divide us again. And we made a promise to each other, a promise that would define the rest of our lives together. My suitcase is now home, the journey that made me whole. What if I told you that the suitcase I arrived with, the one that held my entire life, my hopes, my fears, and my dreams, is now sitting in my attic? Empty and forgotten, because I finally realized that home was never inside that suitcase at all. It was inside me. And it was inside the people I found along the way. That realization came to me on a quiet Sunday afternoon, years after that terrifying first day at LAX. Sophia was 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework, and Mark was outside grilling burgers for dinner. I was looking through old photos, and I found a picture of myself from my first week in America, wide-eyed, terrified, clutching that suitcase like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I barely recognized that woman. She was so scared. So unsure. So desperate to belong. And yet, looking at her now, I felt nothing but love. Because she had no idea what was waiting for her. She had no idea that the broken English she was so ashamed of would lead her to the love of her life. She had no idea that the struggles she was enduring would make her stronger, braver, and more resilient than she could ever imagine. She had no idea that America wasn't just a country, it was a collection of people who would change her forever. The woman at the airport who helped me find my sister. The kind cashier who didn't rush me. Karen, who gave me a chance when my English was barely functional. The strangers who showed me kindness when I felt invisible. Mark, who saw past my accent and fell in love with my heart. Sophia, who made me proud to share my culture and my language. And all the moments in between, the embarrassing mistakes, the cultural misunderstandings, the nights I wanted to give up. And the mornings I found the strength to try again. They all led me here. To this kitchen. To this family. To this life that I never could have imagined when I stepped off that plane with one suitcase and a heart full of fear. I turned to Sophia and asked her, "What do you think it means to belong?" She thought for a moment and said, "I think it means you have people who love you, even when you make mistakes. Like how I love you, Mommy. Even when you say the wrong words." I started laughing and crying at the same time. Because she was right. That's exactly what it means. Mark walked in with the burgers and saw me crying. "What happened?" he asked, concerned. I smiled through my tears and said, "Nothing happened. Everything happened. And I'm so grateful. This is my story. A story of arriving with nothing and building a life. A story of mistakes and love and learning. A story that proves that your accent is not a flaw, your English is not a failure, and your culture is not a burden. They are the threads that make you who you are. So if you're watching this, struggling with your English, feeling invisible, wanting to give up, please don't. Keep going. Keep trying. Keep speaking, even when you're scared. Because somewhere out there, there are people who will see you, love you, and welcome you home. You just have to believe that you belong, because you do. That's all for today. I'll make more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe to see them.